and especially this university, have the history of a shared governance model. How does that affect the way you need to be a leader in a university?
Well, so I'm a firm believer a university is organized like an upside-down pyramid. And the president and the deans are down at the bottom supporting the rest of the activity of the faculty and students. That's a really good way to think about it, because that drives home the notion that your job is to serve. The way you get things done in a university, the president and deans aren't going to win Nobel Prizes or Pulitzer Awards or have distinguished careers as students. It's by enabling them that you get things done. And so I think that really affects the way you think about a university, and it is quite different. You serve a different set of constituents. It's a more complicated structure. It's a more complicated objective function. After all, if you told me, well, the job of the universities is to first charge all the students less than it costs to educate them, and then if they can't afford that, give them financial aid, so you're losing money. On an operational basis, you're losing money, right? And no corporation would do that for very long before Wall Street got very upset with them.
And the donations wouldn't be coming in over the door.
And they wouldn't, of course.
From Wall Street.
Of course.
Does it take a longer time period, do you think? You know, presidential terms in universities, after once being quite long, have retreated to shorter time periods overall. Yet you served for a long term, obviously very successfully over a long period of time. Does that shared governance requirement make it better to have longer terms, all things being equal to, because it takes longer?
It takes longer to get things done. Yes, it certainly takes longer to get things done. I mean, I think part of what's happened in universities is the complexity, the scale of the organizations have just become very difficult for people to do, and probably some of them just simply reach the role where they become a president or a chancellor late enough in life that they're not going to do it very long. And I think that's different. But I think my belief is we would benefit if people had longer term in leadership positions. Now, of course, that requires them. I've observed in a university, if somebody is not doing well, the odds are that they're going to be fired by a faculty revolt. It's very different. You know, in a company, you very rarely get fired by a revolt by the employees. It's usually the board that makes the decision, maybe under pressure from Wall Street. In a university, you look at presidential resignations. Most of them occur because the faculty are unhappy. And often the board holds things together, trying desperately to keep it from going off the rails. But the faculty revolt, and eventually the board realizes that they can't resist that loss of confidence that the faculty have.
Yeah, good example of that going on right now.
Yes, exactly, several of them.
I want to talk about two events that you mentioned in the book, and that, of course, I remember well, but was observing from a different vantage point. And I think they illustrate a lot of the issues of leadership that you talk about in the book. The first was the proposed New York campus, and which was obviously not a success. And the other was Night Hennessy, which was a great success. The first question is, the common characteristic was that both were bold initiatives. I mean, either one was way out of the fairway of what we would normally be looking at as a university program within our construct. It was what, when I was in business school, they called big, hairy, audacious goals. How important is it for a leader to be bold? Can you be a great leader maintaining the status quo, or do you need ambition to motivate your team?
I think it depends on the time. I think Dick Lyman was a great leader because he maintained Stanford through an extremely difficult period, right? It wasn't a time to talk about doing bold new things. It was a time to try to keep the university alive and consistent and not betray your values. So he was very much shaped by that time. But, you know, when we were starting the initial discussions that eventually led to the Stanford Challenge, and we were talking with the deans about how had Stanford had this remarkable trajectory beginning in the late 50s when it rose from being, let's say, not in the top 10 universities and maybe not even in the top 20 in the country, to all of a sudden one that, over say, 40 years, to one that was recognized as one of the very best universities in the country. And it was Kathleen Sullivan, the Dean of the Law School, said, well, there were some audacious steps taken. Moving the medical school from San Francisco down to here, starting basic sciences in the medical school, building SLAC, building out engineering in the aftermath of World War II as all the opportunities became available, and science as the National Science Foundation. And we all thought about that and we said, that would change the trajectory. If we want to change the trajectory going forward, if we want to, we need to have similarly bold ideas.
And is part of that also that if you need resources to chase big ideas or to execute big ideas, it's easier to have big resources available for big ideas?
Sure. I mean, people are going to invest in things they really think will change the landscape in some way that has an important social return to society.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Knight Hennessy would be a great example of inspiring a mega donor to back something precisely because it was a big idea that they can understand the importance of. How about the reverse side? The failure of the New York campus negotiations, which, of course, we worked through together. You describe it, I think, under the category of courage.
Well, because we had to pull the plug.
Right, exactly.
Either that or sign an agreement that we thought violated what we thought were the core principles.
But to my eye, what you showed that was more important was resilience, great resilience. And resilience, I saw in the new Doris Kearns Goodwin book on the leadership of the four presidents that she selected. She defined resilience as the ability to sustain ambition in the face of frustration. I thought that was a fabulous
Yeah, it's a great one. It's a great summary.
Description. But what impressed me was that you moved on to new things and you tried to learn from what had happened. It also, I thought, was a great illustration of the question that most people simultaneously, who are leaders, are simultaneously trying to lead the people who are below them in the organization, but they're also trying to manage the people who are above them in the organization, whether it's a board or whether in other roles it's just a more senior manager above them. How do you see as the best ways for someone who aspires to be a leader but has people both below and above, what do they do with the people above? How do you maintain? And the New York campus, obviously.
Yeah, the New York campus is a good example because I think, at least initially, there was not unanimity in the trustees on the idea, and many of the trustees were concerned that it would pull attention away from the core campus or resources away from the core campus. And from the beginning, even the faculty were concerned about that. So the key thing we had to establish with the faculty was whatever happened in New York would be of the same quality as if it happened here in Palo Alto. And that meant that we wouldn't have an A campus and a B campus. We would have faculty in computer science or in another department, some of whom happen to be in New York, and some of whom happen to be in Palo Alto. And maybe those where they were would change over time. So that was key to getting a model that would get the faculty on board. I think the real concern, the trustees were concerned about a variety of things, including the reality of the politics that inevitably creep in when you deal with any public entity. And we discovered those in the end, and I think they made getting a deal much harder, basically. In the end, we concluded we couldn't get the deal that we had established with the faculty with its key things. So it was time to pull the plug, and I just kind of realized it. And when I talked to the team that was doing the negotiating, and we talked about all these difficulties, I just said, I don't think this is the beginning. I don't think this is the end of our difficulty just getting through this negotiation. I think that will be the beginning of our difficulties as we go forward in implementing it. And we're going to have to sacrifice too much. So I think we then made that decision.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would say you did before that was extremely valuable is you built a big balance in your trust bank. The board, I think, recognized that you were always honest.
Mm-hmm.
You did not hide bad news
Right.
or potential problems, and that if you wanted to try something that was a strategic, logically strategic initiative, that you had earned the right to do that, and that if it was problematic, that you had demonstrated you would come and say it was problematic, and in fact, that's exactly how it played out. So I think it's an interesting example of leadership at multi-levels, of both above you and below you as you were trying to execute an interesting idea that just didn't work.
Right. And I talk about the relationship between the leadership team and the board as one that's based on collaboration. And I think this is true in great corporate boards as well as in great nonprofit boards. It's about collaboration. So both parties have to be ensured that they understand where they are, what the issues are. So the president of the institution or the CEO has to make sure their board knows where they are. We used to say no surprises. No surprises. That's the same thing I would say to my staff. No surprises. If something is going off the rails, I want to know from you first. I don't want to find out in the pages of the local newspaper.
Yeah. Amen.